So a few years ago, I got one of the craziest phone calls in my life. There were a bunch of FBI agents descending on a sanctuary in Colorado because of me, searching for me, and I guess more specifically, searching for two piglets that I had allegedly rescued from a factory farm in Utah. In fact, the single largest pig farm in the nation. And that sent me hurtling down a journey that in the last few years has completely changed my life, but also has taught me incredibly valuable lessons that I've been reflecting on a lot and that I thought I'd share with all of you at the end of 2024. So, just to give you some more backdrop, what happened in Colorado was a caravan of 4 SUVs filled with FBI agents, state police officers, and apparently even some veterinary officials from the state of Colorado. We're trying to chase down these two piglets because I was accused of having stolen these piglets from Circle 4 Farms in Beaver County, Utah. And Circle 4 Farms is the single largest pig farm of a company called Smithfield Foods, which is the single largest pig production company in the world. It's owned by a Chinese billionaire. And the reason I had been inside this farm was because the farm had promised the world 10 years prior that it would stop using this medieval torture device called the gestation crate, essentially this metal tomb that they stuff the mother pigs in that is about 2 feet by 6.5 or 2 feet by 7 feet, 14 square feet of space max for an animal that is often over 600 pounds. So imagine 2 NFL football players, the largest human beings on the face of the planet Earth, living in a bathtub their entire lives. And you basically get a sense of what these mother pigs endure. And the public was outraged by this. There was a lot of outcry. And so Smithfield said, we're going to do away with these gestation crates. Just give us 10 years. We need some time. But in 10 years, you will not see a single crate. And what happened back in 2017 was when we walked into Smithfield's single largest pig farm in southern Utah, we found thousands and thousands of mother pigs in crates and not a single mother pig outside of one. And while we're doing this investigation, which we did with a virtual reality camera rig that was basically gifted to us for a short period of time by a tech company here in the Bay Area, while we were doing this investigation, while we were producing this virtual reality documentary that ultimately became Operation Deathstar, which you can still find on YouTube today, we saw a couple piglets who weren't doing so well. One had a very severely swollen foot, was barely able to walk, and the other was covered in blood, scratches, and cuts all over her face. Both of them were much smaller than the other piglets. One was estimating, anywhere from 1/6 to maybe 1/4 the size of the other piglets. And the one with blood all over her face was maybe about half the size of the other piglets. And there's extensive data showing that piglets in this condition inevitably end up in a landfill. They don't even make it to the next stage of production. And so we had taken these piglets to the vet. They shouldn't have been there in the first place because a piglet that's a fall behind, a piglet that's suffering, that's starving, should not be allowed to suffer on a factory farm. So even by the company's own policies, they were supposed to have euthanized the animals, which is really just a very, very disturbing euphemism for what they actually do, which is either throw them into a gas chamber and asphyxiate the poor piglets or smash their skulls against the concrete. But instead, these 2 piglets miraculously made it out alive. And one of them is still alive to this day. I actually just saw her a couple months ago. But we rushed these piglets to the vet, took them to a sanctuary in Utah. They ultimately ended up in Colorado. And for doing that, again, 4 SUVs, a full caravan of federal agents was crossing the country, trying to obtain evidence against me and potentially bring these piglets back. The charges, when they ultimately came down, were 4 Class 2 felonies, including a racketeering charge. Racketeering is a charge that is usually brought against organized crime syndicates. You won't see it brought against, frankly, even violent gangs for the most part. It really has to be something much more sophisticated and organized than that. It's about basically unlawfully creating an enterprise that over a period of time engages in a pattern of unlawful activity. It's just one of the 4 Class 2 felonies, which is right below murder, that I was charged with that cumulatively could have led me to be in prison for 60 years. And There is something about potentially losing your freedom that forces you to learn. And so for the last 7 years since this incident happened, I've had to learn a lot. And partly because we learned a lot, 2 years ago, we won a historic verdict, an acquittal. In fact, I think it was the first acquittal in a deeply conservative, deep red county in southern Utah in defense of the right to rescue. The jury of 8 randomly drawn members of the community of southern Utah, conservative, Mormon, agricultural, said that I had the right to rescue these 2 piglets. And it's the reason I'm a free man today. So yeah, some important lessons in all this. And it's funny because a lot of people think that we won this case because of my oratorical gifts, and I'm a reasonably good communicator, but it's actually not because of that. Some people think it's because of the David versus Goliath story, the fact that Smithfield is a Chinese company, and that played a role, but it wasn't because of that. Fundamentally, I think one of the principal reasons, and maybe the principal reason, maybe the only important reason that we won that case, and I think this is a lesson for all of us, is because I developed the ability to make friends of my enemies, to make friends of people who are very different from me, and people who are adversarial to me. And that's why we won. So let's unpack that a little bit. So as part of the prosecution in the Smithfield case, the prosecution had to prove that I was engaged in racketeering, that I had a pattern of unlawful activity. And the way to do this, and a pattern is obviously more than one incident, and they couldn't just show that I had rescued animals on this one occasion at a factory farm in Utah. They had to show that I'd done it previously, and I had done it previously, and we had been open about all the other times I'd done it. And one of the other times I had openly rescued animals from a factory farm was a place called Norbest in central Utah, a turkey farm owned by a gentleman by the name of Rick Pitman. And I'd been charged in this case, but the charges were much less serious. We had walked into a turkey farm, found conditions that even the president of the company at the time described as disturbing, and had taken a couple of the turkeys out for veterinary care to a sanctuary. But there hadn't been nearly as much of an effort in Sanpete County to track down the turkeys, to bring these just really extravagant charges against me. It was a more standard kind of theft and burglary prosecution. And, but they were including the Sanpete case, this turkey case, and the broader racketeering case against me. And it was instrumental to their case. They had to prove that I was engaged in not just one incident of criminal behavior, but a pattern of unlawful behavior. And to prove that, they needed this company to work with them, this company in Sanpete County called Norbest. And, you know, honestly, when the case started, no one suspected this would be a problem for the prosecution because, after all, we had taken animals from them. We had been in the national media attacking this company. And this is in a very adversarial industry. Frankly, if anything, the turkey and poultry industry were more adversarial towards me than the pig farming industry. Because if there's one industry that we've targeted more than the other, it's definitely the poultry industry. I mean, the first open rescue I did back in 2015 was in an egg farm. Some of the biggest investigations and the mass open rescues we've done have pretty much only been at poultry farms. So if anything, you'd think the poultry farmers would be even more upset at us. But something pretty miraculous happened a few years ago when I was outside of a massive turkey plant in central Utah. I and some of my co-defendants were out there just live streaming, doing a little vigil and protest, honoring the animals who were being slaughtered. And an SUV pulls up. And it's, you know, an older white gentleman in the SUV. And I think it's just like any other security truck outside of a slaughterhouse. I've interacted with security guards at factory farms and slaughterhouses countless times over the last 20 years of my life. And I thought it was just another one of those conversations. And so gentleman says, you know, hello, how are you all doing? And I say, hey, how are you doing? He says, like, no, I'd love to hear more about why you're out here. And I think to myself, and I think the other activists think to myself, this guy's just trying to entrap us. He's trying to get us to prove that we broke into the place, we stole some more turkeys or something like that. But for whatever reason, I decided, oh, this guy seems like a reasonable dude. He seems like he's willing to talk, and I tend to not follow my own advice as an attorney and talk a lot to people who are adversarial. Like most attorneys would say, when you're in the context of a criminal case and you're facing very serious felony charges, you should exercise your right to remain silent. I don't follow my own advice, or at least the standard advice of criminal defense attorneys. I exercise my right to speak, and I did speak to this guy. And, we just started chit-chatting. I said, look, we got some concerns, and I'd love to talk to someone at the company and share those concerns so you could do something about it and help these birds. And frankly, maybe help the company repair its public relations damage from the investigation we'd done. But I didn't think much of it. I've had, again, thousands of conversations like this. I didn't think it was going anywhere. But this gentleman says, you know what? I'd love to hear more about that. And I'm wondering if you're willing to come in and have like a longer conversation with me outside of the cameras, without these other people present. Come on in and let's have a heartfelt conversation. And I say, sure, why not? And my fellow activists and co-defendants are looking at me like, are you out of your mind? You're gonna walk into this slaughterhouse? This is clearly entrapment. They're gonna call the police. They're claim your trespass, claim you damaged some property. I mean, they're always saying so many ridiculous things about vegans and animal rights activists. And I thought this would be another case of them trying to trap us. And so, I think all my co-defendants, their mouths are open, just like, what are you doing? You can't just walk into this place with this strange man and expect this is going to go well. And, with no cameras, no witnesses, nothing present, just you and him surrounded by the slaughterhouse machinery and all of his workers and all his supporters and no one to support you. But I said, no, something about this guy. I trust him. I'm going to come in. I do tend to trust people more than I should. That's either my greatest virtue or my greatest vice, depending on your perspective on things. But I go in and walk in. And I say, hey, nice to meet you. We walk. Thank God we don't actually go into the slaughter area. And I think, I didn't want to see that. Although, honestly, it might have been a good experience for me to be in a slaughterhouse while it's in operation and during daylight. But I didn't do that on that particular day. Instead, we're standing kind of outside one of the offices. Just I forget if I walked in or if I drove in with him, but it's a little bit of a distance from the entrance. I don't think the people from the outside could see exactly where I was at that point. And I do the normal thing. I just introduce myself and say, hey, my name's Hsiung. And the gentleman says in response, hi, my name's Rick Pitman. And my jaw drops. And I say, Rick Pitman? As in the owner of Pitman Family Farms? As in the owner of Norbest? He says, oh, yeah, that's me. And I realized this guy is one of the largest poultry magnates in the entire Western United States. Every single Whole Foods around the country sells his chicken. And he had just bought out one of the largest turkey farms in the Western United States, Norbest, that does something like 2 million turkeys every single year. A few months before Thanksgiving, here I am outside of his slaughterhouse, outside of a company that is going to slaughter 2 million of his turkeys that year and hundreds of thousands before Thanksgiving. In a moment where I'm facing very serious criminal charges in 2 separate counties, in part for stealing, quote unquote, stealing his turkeys. I think to myself, oh, what have I gotten myself into? But honestly, my first reaction after I was just kind of like stunned and shocked by, this is literally Rick Pitman. This is our biggest adversary. This is the guy who we're trying to stop more than anyone else in the poultry industry, frankly, in the Western United States, because we'd actually investigated and rescued animals from multiple of his farms. It wasn't just Norbest. I said to myself, this is actually a really important opportunity. I wasn't even sure exactly what the opportunity was. I just knew it was an opportunity. I wasn't sure. Maybe there's some storytelling. Maybe there's a video that could be done. I didn't really know what was going to happen. But the amazing thing that developed after, honestly, the first minute or two of the conversation was we kind of realized we liked each other. So I said, first of all, thank you, Mr. Pitman. It takes a lot of guts to talk to me. I mean, I've been one of your biggest adversaries, and I'm a little shocked you're even willing to have a conversation with me, because most of the people in your position are trying to put me in prison or frankly kill me. I think they're, at this point, I'd faced so many death threats I think that summer before I went to Utah, there had been so many people who had just been randomly calling me and threatening to kill me. There had been, I think just a few weeks prior, somebody called me and said he was a police officer and they were coming with armed men to raid my home. And it's funny, that guy, I was pretty sure he was not actually a police officer and he was not part of an armed raid that was going to raid my home, because the cops don't call you before they're going to raid your home. But that was the sort of thing that was happening to me a lot. And here I had the most powerful, or among the most powerful people, and certainly one of the people who was on the face of planet Earth most aggrieved by my actions. And I say to him, you know, I'm honestly kind of surprised you're willing to talk to me. And he says, well, thank you. I appreciate that. I've always thought there's a lot for me to learn from people who criticize us. And that's something I think that is very praiseworthy and something I aspire to myself, to be willing to talk to critics. And he said, you know, I want to thank you for pointing out some things that we could do better at this company. And I was pretty surprised by that. And you never know if people are being genuine when they say those sorts of things, because, you know, there's a lot of PR nonsense. But my sense always, with all my interactions with Rick, and I've now had interactions with him for many years, is he means what he says. Like he doesn't have too much of a political bone in him, sometimes to his detriment. But he's a pretty straightforward guy, you know, a pretty simple man who's trying to achieve some pretty simple things. Now, there's simple things that are being done in a way that I don't approve of. I don't think, for example, one should support one's family by hurting animals. I don't think one should try and develop and provide economic vitality in a community by hurting animals. But in all my experiences, and I saw this from the first conversation I had with him, it felt like his goals were very simple. His needs were very simple. And that's something that resonated with me, because I've always thought, and I've been talking to, trying to understand, analyzing, sometimes taking an enormous amount of data about what's happening in typically rural, but sometimes urban areas of the country where animals are being slaughtered en masse. This is a question that I've been trying to answer for 20 plus years since I first realized what was happening to animals. And I think, you know, even though there's so many sophisticated, complicated dimensions to this problem, at the end of the day, it's actually quite simple. It's that people need to fulfill their needs. They need to eat, need to have a job, the need to provide for one's family. And they believe that the way they can fulfill those needs is by hurting animals. It's that simple. And Rick was an example of this, you know. He told me about the fact that San Pete County was suffering as a county. He told me about the fact that the company, before he bought it out, was going to fall apart. He told me about his desire to improve, quote unquote, protein in America, make sure it's healthier, it's more environmentally friendly, it's kinder to the animals. And he sounded like he meant it. And I shared with him a little bit about what I needed, what my goals were in coming there. And I said to him that I think that what happens in factory farms and slaughterhouses is not just immoral, but a legal abomination. That even at the slaughterhouse we were standing at, on that day, there had been recent Freedom of Information Act requests undertaken by us and by other animal rights groups, showing that historically some of the turkeys that were left out in the sun, because basically what happens is the turkeys come from the farms. If the slaughterhouse is not running very efficiently, they actually just sit out there in a truck, packed in, you know, sometimes like a dozen or more in a tiny little crate, without any food or water. And while there is a law in the United States called the 28-hour law, that in theory requires that the animals be given food and water at least once every 28 hours. And these FOIA requests were showing that federal inspectors were finding in some cases these birds are being left out for 2, 3, 4 days. A lot of them were just dying of heat stroke and dehydration in the scathing hot Utah desert because they were left out in these kind of holdover barns, not even barns, or just like sometimes just a roof, and sometimes the roof wasn't even covering the truck. In the scathing hot Utah summer with no food or water because the slaughterhouse just wasn't ready to slaughter them. So they'd just be left out there to suffer to death. And you're seeing thousands of these turkeys just dying. And I told him this. I said, this sort of thing shouldn't happen. And frankly, it's not just that it shouldn't happen. It's a violation of law. And he said, it's a good point. And I know about this, and we're trying to do something about it. We put some misters out on the barns so that the turkeys are at least cool. Trying to figure out why we're seeing trucks pull up in time periods where we're not actually ready to quote unquote process them. And I actually saw the misters. I saw that they had actually installed some things to try and alleviate the suffering of these poor birds and the days before they were going to be slaughtered. I thought, I appreciate this guy. I mean, I'm not in alignment with him. I don't think these animals should be slaughtered at all. But he seems genuine in his desire to try and improve their welfare. So there's already some connection just because he shared some criticisms of me and some thoughts with me, including that we had not made much of an effort to engage with the local community or understand the suffering the local community was going through because of the decline in the turkey industry. I shared some criticisms with him, including the fact that animals were dying of heat stroke and dehydration outside of his slaughterhouse. But the thing that really connected us was the fact that we shared quite a bit about our respective faiths. I shared with him that I'm a Buddhist in a nation where Buddhism is not particularly common. And he was a Mormon in a nation where Mormons have, all sorts of stereotypes about them that lead to a feeling that this country isn't for me, or at least many people in this country don't think it's for me. There's a real connection in that conversation because there's something about, even if you just think to yourself about times in your life where you felt excluded or different or mocked because of that difference, and how valuable it's been to have someone who understands that feeling. There's like a little bit of a mind meld of that movement between me and Rick. And after that conversation, honestly, we struck up a friendship, and we've been friends ever since. And partly due to that friendship, not only did the most serious charge in the Smithfield case unravel, because without the support of the turkey farm and the turkey farmer, this racketeering charge, the pattern of unlawful activity, remember me saying that they had to prove not just one, but multiple incidents. I believe in Utah, they have to prove at least 3 incidents to show a pattern. And one of the 3 incidents disappeared. And so that most serious charge was just dropped from the case. But even more amazingly, when we finally went to trial on some of the remaining charges in the Smithfield case, in the case involving the piglets, I don't even remember which lawyer it was. It might have been me, it might have been one of my co-counsel. But somebody came up with the idea of having Rick Pitman, testify for us. To have someone who is an adversary and enemy, in fact, arguably our greatest adversary, show the jury that he'd turned around and now supported us. And honestly, when we initially reached out to him, I thought there's no chance he's going to agree to do this. This is like, he's going to be turning against his own industry in a lot of ways. And so many people are going to hate him for what he's planning to do. But I was pretty stunned because when I gave Rick a call and said, look, we got this crazy idea. And, I know we've been talking to each other, working together. I'd invited him to an animal rights conference. That was incredibly controversial. I got in so much trouble for that. But I gave him a call and I said, Rick, we got this crazy idea. I know you've been helping us already with this Utah case. You were instrumental in getting the racketeering charge. And, Rick is not a lawyer or particularly well-versed in law, so he didn't understand exactly what was happening in the case. But he did understand that in some way his company and he had been embroiled in the case previously, but now they had gotten out of it, because they had dropped the racketeering charge. What had happened at his company no longer was relevant directly to the case. But I said, One, your company could come up in some context. And honestly, we kind of wanted to come up now because it's such a great story about how this nation and how each of us individually can actually resolve some of the biggest problems we're facing, namely by coming together and talking to each other instead of trying to destroy each other. And Rick and I have always bonded over that fundamental principle that there's a lot more to gain from talking to each other than trying to hurt each other. But still, I just thought, look, I mean, it's one thing to believe in that in the abstract. It's another thing to sacrifice your company's reputation in the factory farming and the poultry industry to be seen as a traitor, a Benedict Arnold to the entire farming industry by testifying on behalf of the guy who many of these factory farmers hate more than anyone in the world, who many of these factory farmers and agricultural producers see as a threat to their business and frankly, their way of life. To take my side against another farm was seen, honestly, correctly as a betrayal by so many people in the farming industry. And yet Rick said yes. He said, I'm in. You're my friend. We've talked for years. I trust you. You've lived up to your word in every instance where you've made a promise to me. And I want to support you. I don't want to see you go to jail. And when he testified, it was, pretty remarkable testimony, because I asked him, what our background was, what your experience with was, whether you believe I'd stolen anything from your property. And he was limited in what he was able to testify about because he was what's called a character witness. He was allowed to testify as to my reputation for honesty and integrity and describe the backdrop, his personal experiences with me that led him to reach that conclusion. But I couldn't get too much into the details of the fact that we had specifically rescued turkeys from his farm and that we had been charged and ultimately exonerated. Partly because Rick just said, I have no interest in this. And they just took some sick turkeys from the farm. It's a legitimate thing to do when they're disturbing conditions. But amazingly, when the prosecution cross-examined him, they asked him about all these things. And they don't have the same limits that we had because they're allowed to dive into anything in cross-examination, or not anything, but a lot more than we could. And they did ask him, isn't it true that Mr. Hsiung stole some turkeys from you too? They're basically trying to bring in this racketeering charge back in through the back door. And Rick offers just a perfect response. And it was amazing because it happened not when we were examining him, but when the prosecution was examining him. He says, no, I wouldn't call that stealing. They saw some turkeys that needed some help. And they gave them some help. It's not stealing. Or something along those lines. You can actually check the video footage to see the exact, there's video footage from the Smithfield trial that's been posted to get the exact quote. And everyone in the room is just like, who's an animal rights activist, including me. Our eyes are just opening up and saying like, this is amazing. We just got one of the most important people in the agricultural industry to defend the right to rescue and say we weren't stealing or just trying to give some animals some help who needed some help. And we actually had some other witnesses that we were planning to call. We said, no, let's just end the trial here. This is a perfect place to end it. And we ended it, went to closing argument, and we won. Okay. So what's the moral of the story? Probably the most important lesson I've learned over the last few years, and I think the most important lesson you can learn in 2024 as you move into 2025 is we all have to learn to make friends of people we see as adversaries. In many ways, it is precisely our adversaries who it's most important for us to learn to be compassionate towards. And it's just kind of a wild thing to say in a time where there's warfare, polarization. People are terrified about Trump. People who support Trump are terrified about the libs. But there's one thing I've learned. It's that the things that have transformed me the most in a positive way, that have helped me in my ability to transform the world, usually involve uncomfortable situations and uncomfortable relationships that you can strengthen by being brave. And I think Rick was brave. I like to think I was brave too, and developing that relationship. But I think all of us can be brave. And there's even sociological research showing that if you're willing to be brave in this way and connect with people who are very different from you, it has exceptional value, because The people you know, the people who are closest to you, who you're already comfortable with, they all have the same knowledge, the same networks that you have. Well, someone very different like Rick has a very different reputation, have this very different set of facts in his head, has a very different social network that he can harness to help you in ways that someone who's very similar to you, someone who's already your friend, might not have those abilities. And that's exactly what happened at the Smithfield trial. There was no one in my network who could have spoken to the jury as powerfully as Rick, because everyone in my network was a vegan, an animal rights activist, people similar to me. It was precisely because our friendship had so much adversity in the early stages that made it so valuable in the long term. And that's one of the primary lessons. But just some other lessons I think I've been thinking hard about are, one is all of us have to dive more into the details, because one of the problems with my perception of Rick and Rick's perception of me was it was very surface level. And I think it took us talking and having a long form conversation, diving deeper into the things we actually believed, to realize we actually had a profound connection. And this is not just true of people, it's true of ideas, it's true of projects. You know, and in the era of TikTok, very few people are going beyond 30 seconds or, 240 characters. The people who actually dive deep are the people who make change. And that was proven by this trial. But maybe the most important lesson I'm going to leave you all with, and then I'll end this conversation because I don't want to make this too long. I should say this monologue, is to have faith. Rick had faith that this conversation would go okay, despite the fact that we're adversaries. I had faith that even walking to the slaughterhouse wouldn't lead to additional criminal charges or a trap or incarceration. And it wasn't just tactical for us to have this faith. I think both of us had something that I think is relatively uncommon in the cynical world in which we live, which is we had faith in a bigger vision as to what we could achieve. That faith wasn't exactly the same. And I think Rick's vision of the future of the world is very different from mine. But both of us believed that we could inspire the people around us to join us in our vision. For Rick, that's higher welfare for animals, a more natural production process. For me, that's liberation for all sentient beings. So our visions aren't the same, but we both believe in a vision. We have faith that those around us can believe in that vision. And part of the reason we were able to make that connection was we believed. We had faith. So I'm totally interested in hearing your thoughts in 2024 about what we should be doing in 2025. But are three from me. One is, make friends with the people who are your adversaries. Don't cancel them. Don't condemn them. Make friends with them. Second is dive deep. Don't stay at the surface level. And third is have some faith, because faith is part of what changes the world. But I'd be very interested to hear your lessons too. So thanks to all of you for following these journeys. It's been a wild couple of years. I think 2025 is going to be wild too. Stay tuned for a lot more. There's going to be a lot of changes, both to this podcast and YouTube show and to the more general work that I and other animal rights activists are doing. And thank you for all the support. It's meant a lot to me. And until next time, Happy New Year. We don't have to hurt animals. You can protect them. We don't have to kill them. We can care for them. And that's who we're meant to be, right? That's who we are when we're at our best. We're caring for each other and for the other living beings of this earth and not hurting them.